Jared Benoff, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for having me.
Jared, two big themes to your story today. First, the industry that you bought into, the travel agency niche, which I think is bound to surprise people, as it did me. And second, buying a business from your parents. Let's get into it, Jared. I think the story begins with your parents being entrepreneurial as you grew up, yes?
That's right. Yeah. So it started, I grew up in an entrepreneurial household, and my friends roasted me for a long time that I would have to submit invoices and P&Ls during college to my parents for them to, send me some money for college each semester. But that was the mindset. I always thought that was normal. And so I grew up around this. And, one of the things that my dad said to me when I was pursuing, a career post-grad, he said, just don't get a government job. And he said that, somewhat facetiously. And what did I do? I went and did public service for a little bit. And I loved it. I adored it. And I learned a ton working in the federal government. And that actually propelled my career. And I was able to then go from the government to working at Twitter, where I worked with many government partners across the aisle and up and down government, and helped them leverage social media tools. And again, that was the early days of me kind of figuring out what is my sales pitch and how do I work with partners. And from there, I moved closer to the sales side. And that's what I did for about 9.5 years at the company. But I always had this itch, and I always thought about, what would be next. And my wife and I had these discussions, what do we want with our lives and what do we want for our careers? And I always knew that, my upbringing had a massive influence on me. And I thought, I want to do this entrepreneurial thing. And I looked around, I would talk to brokers. I'd be one of those tire kickers, honestly. I had this moment of reflection where I was like, what am I doing? I'm not about to go buy a pressure washer business or an HVAC business. That's not me. I've grown up around computers. I'm a social media guy. And what I realized over the course of a few years was the business that I wanted to acquire was right in front of me. It was started by my parents. And so that's when I had that moment of, okay, take a step back, look in front of you and recognize the opportunity right there.
Great. Well, let's unpack some of that. First of all, 9.5 years at Twitter.
Yeah.
From what year to what year?
From 2015 to 2024, to the end of 2024.
To the end of, so 3 months ago.
Early 2025. Yeah.
So you were there during the Elon acquisition.
I was, yeah. Our team, I was on the sales side, based in New York City, selling, working with Fortune 500 advertisers, selling them advertising. And so I was there throughout the transition, late night emails from Elon and his new team and trying to understand the business. And working through that was a wild, wild roller coaster.
Wow. Well, given that, that it's its own podcast, so we're not going to spend much time there, but given that you experienced that front lines from within Twitter/X, and also that you have this government experience from before you went to Twitter, you just probably have a very unique perspective on all these emails that are going out to federal employees. You probably can understand better what that experience is like than even people experiencing it, because you've received emails like that only at Twitter.
Yeah, I definitely empathize with everyone with what's going on. The pace of Elon and his team is incredible. And so I empathize with everyone trying to grapple with that.
Yeah. And then as you were, going through your tire kicking phase, so it sounds like, the entrepreneurial itch that you had was always going to manifest in buying a business as opposed to starting something, being that you were at Twitter, exposed to tech in New York. You didn't have a startup idea that was the path instead?
Not really. I thought about this a lot. And, early days, I would think about starting a business, whether that be an agency or something more service driven or even product driven. But I realized my skill set is more in growing things and building, taking it from 1 to 100. I realized I'm not a 0 to 1 guy. It's just not my strengths. And so I honestly, through a lot of the SMB Twitter community, saw these stories of people buying businesses and acquiring businesses. And that seemed to resonate much more with me in that journey than even being around, so many people in the tech community, both at big companies like Twitter and Facebook and Google, as well as some of the smaller startups in the ecosystem. I just found myself gravitating much more towards the acquisition space.
So your exposure to ETA actually was via SMB Twitter, where
100%.
you were also working as ad sales
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
It's so funny. We used to joke with our clients when I was working on Twitter that so much of our job is living on the platform and experiencing the content and seeing what people are saying, what's the meme of the day. And for me, it happened a lot during, the early days of COVID when SMB Twitter really blew up. I found myself just gravitating towards that community, and I would reach out to people just saying, hey, I'm curious about what you're doing here, and, tell me about your story and let's chat. And I think people were very open in those days to chatting and just sort of talking to other people. And I just found myself going down these rabbit holes of talking to different business owners and different people in the ecosystem. And I fell in love with it. Like, I thought it was the coolest thing and such a great way to build a life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, probably some of those people have been on this podcast.
Yes.
And you talk about it, SMB Twitter, as that was kind of the golden age. Do you think that it's changed?
I think it's evolved. I think the platform's evolved. I still think there's so much great content out there, and people are so generous with their time. And so many people who I've talked to over the years, and many who I haven't even talked to, are just generous with education and knowledge and experience. And I've been the lucky benefactor of that, as I'm sure many others have been, you included. I mean, you do this podcast and get people to share their stories. And I think the platform has changed, but like, I think there's still these niche communities out there where people are collaborative and engaging and doing it for all the right reasons, which is great to see. And it's partially why I stuck around for 9.5 years, because I love the platform. And I think there's so much value that people can get when they use it in the right way. Okay,
Jared. So returning to the plot then. So you say to yourself, I'm not going to buy some blue collar business. That's just not me. I've grown up with computers. I've been, in tech land, and been doing basically, sponsorship sales and so on. So the idea of buying a power washing company just doesn't quite make sense. It's interesting that I don't have more people kind of hit that wall, because most probably of my guests are coming from a white collar environment, and yet they plow forward with those types of businesses. I digress. You have a business right in front of you, your parents' business, that seems like the best candidate of all. Other than it not being a kind of blue collar trades business, why else was it a good candidate?
I mean, let's invert the question. Like, why was it a bad candidate? It's largely project based, which I'll speak about. There was a lot of key man risk that it was like my dad running the show for a long time, and everyone else sort of supported him. Long sales cycles and so many other things in the traditional like ETA community that you'd look at this business and go, it's not great. But for me, again, like, I had heard so many people talk about just do your first deal and like get that experience. And this seemed like the logical path forward, where I love the industry travel. I like the lifestyle that it allows. I love the interaction with other people. And I love, again, these things that might not be attractive to a normal acquirer, I love because I grew up around it and I saw my parents do it. And I was like, I could do this. And, I knew the things that they were doing, and I saw the sort of future looking arbitrage opportunities with the business to say, okay, this is what's working for them, and I see how it's working. And I know that, with some fine tuning and with some different systems, with some marketing, and I know that's sort of like a cliche thing, like, oh, just like add marketing, like sprinkle it on top.
Yeah.
And in this case, like, there is a lot of that rings true. And so I saw that opportunity working and supporting my parents in some ways that, like, okay, if I take this over, like, I have a plan to sort of see through the next 10, 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I think another part of your appeal here is because you were already very familiar with the business. I mean, meaning not just because it was your parents' business, but you'd actually helped them a lot and worked inside the business as an unpaid consultant, I guess. So you really knew the inner workings. This is probably, why don't we get the history of the business? And this involves your dad a lot, because that, I think, is just helps paint a picture too of how you perceive the opportunity. So maybe give us his story in this business.
It's interesting. So again, like, I grew up in this entrepreneurial household. And so when I was younger, my dad had started a website where you could book honeymoons online. At the time, this is like 1999, 2000. It's a novel idea. Nowadays we're like, well, duh, of course you can do that. But at the time, no one was doing that. And so he started this website. He sold that to The Knot, which if people aren't familiar, it's one of the largest companies in the online wedding space. They were publicly traded for a bit. I'm not sure if they are anymore. But so he sold to them in around 2000, 2001, and had just been tangentially involved in the wedding and travel space ever since, through consulting, through helping other travel agencies, things like that. And about 15 years ago, my parents were empty nesters. Me, my brother, and my sister were off at school. And I think they were kind of like yearning for that next thing. And they were like, well, we have, our clients who we still help with travel on a one-off basis. Let's just give it another go and build up another travel agency. And what they did was they just started out just sort of serving everyone, and they realized like that's not going to work. That traditional travel agency model that you and I might think about was disappearing very quickly, and so they decided to focus on specific niches, particularly around destination weddings. This was starting to be a more popular trend, and so they went all in on destination weddings, particularly in Mexico and the Caribbean, and just became the go-to experts. And my dad, to his credit, was like, I'm just going to educate people, because people didn't know that you could, save a lot of money by having your wedding abroad, that, there were all these other ancillary benefits. Plus, who wouldn't want to go away for 3-4 days with some of their great friends and family and enjoy a vacation together. And so they specialized in that and grew the business pretty quickly, again, because there weren't many people specializing that. During that time, again, this was really just my parents' sort of side thing, just so that they could do some fun travel and get paid to do it. And they'd come to me for help. They come to my brother for help, and it was like, hey, build us a website, or it was, hey, like help us, send PDFs to people. Like they were doing that at the time, and all these little things over time. And I just kind of fell in love with it. I never, again, like at this point, 10, 15 years ago, I never thought like, oh, I could do this one day for myself. But I loved helping them, and I loved the limited interaction. If they were going on a 2-week trip and they're like, hey, do you mind if people call? Just like sort of screen the calls and just send us an email after. I'm like, yeah, for sure. Or if, so-and-so wants help with a honeymoon, can you do that on the weekend? So like, yeah, for sure. And so all these little things over time just sort of snowballed into me falling in love with the nuances and intricacies of the business. Fast forward today, I mean, they're doing about 100 weddings per year and some ancillary other travel. And I'm happy to like unpack what that looks like, but it's obviously a bit larger than when they just started it. And it was just the two of them. Okay.
So just to distill some of that, they kind of started this as a side thing, almost as not a side thing, almost like a hobby, in a way to expense going, doing some of this travel themselves. And they also identified a niche, because the traditional travel agency where you pick up the phone and you say, book me a flight to Paris is long gone.
Right.
But this is key to the opportunity here, these niches within travel still, certain consumers, certain markets still seek consultants, if you will, to help them plan a trip. And your parents identified destination weddings as just such a niche. And obviously, you can imagine why. That's much more than just booking me a flight. It's a huge amount of logistics. It's international, et cetera. It's also high ticket, something that we'll return to again. And while we hear a lot about destination weddings today, in 2009 and 10, it was not as common. So they were also riding a trend that they saw growing. It is today, we're going to get an update on where things are today, but it's not just the two of them. It's a team. It's a proper business. It's not just them as kind of consultants, if you will. And you were helping them all along the way, getting to see inside the business and indeed interacting with clients a little bit. These 15 years of growth, did they intend for that to happen? You said why they started it was just to kind of scratch their own travel itch. But did they, in their fantasies, imagine building a business here?
I don't think so. My dad's he's done a lot. Like I said, he's super entrepreneurial. Like I'm so impressed with everything he's built over many, many decades. And like at one point he owned a few restaurants, and he's like, that was a nightmare. Like I had so many employees. And so I think when he sold the restaurants and was doing some other stuff and started the travel agency, it was like, I just want to work with, my mom and just do this ourselves. But then it was like, all right, well, we can't do 8 weddings a month. We can't do 12 weddings a month. And so slowly it was like, all right, let's go find like one person to help, then 2, then 3. And ultimately, like coming out of COVID, when things were just absolutely mayhem and travel opened up and all that pent up demand that people have heard about, he was sort of like, well, now we're capped. Like, I don't want any more people. Like, I don't want a big business. Like, I don't want, 50 people working for us. And so he kind of capped. He was like, all right, if we can just do 12 weddings a month, I'll be thrilled at sort of so he capped it. I mean, during 2022 and 2023, when things are really rolling, he was turning away many couples every month, just because he didn't want this huge enterprise. And then he was like, well, maybe I'll retire and sell the business to someone, not knowing that was going to be me at the time. And so he's like, all right, like, let's think about what growth and systems and things like that look like. But yeah, I mean, when they started, you're spot on. Like, this was really just a lifestyle for them to travel and get paid to do that.
Okay. And so bring us back up to the present, or basically when he sold it. What did the business look like at that point?
Yeah, so the business does about 100 groups a year, a little bit less. And when I say group, that's sometimes it's mostly weddings, but that might be a 50th birthday, that might be a bachelorette trip, things like that. But typically, like, where we specialize in, like, our zone of power is with small niche group travel. The average group has about 60 people in it, so you can imagine what that looks like. We've got about 10 people on the team now. Most of those folks are helping the clients with their travel. And like I said, like a few years ago, when I sort of came to this realization that I was interested in acquiring the business, and my dad was thinking, all right, I'm tired, I'm like ready to be done with this. He kept joking with me, I'm going to sell the business for a 6 times multiple and yada, 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 private equity. And I was like, okay, well, what about me? Like, I'll buy the business from you. And like, it started out as a joke. And then eventually we both kind of came to the middle, and we were like, all right, well, like, maybe I will acquire this business. And he was saying, maybe I will sell it to you. And so, over the course of a few years, we became more serious and had many discussions about that and what that would look like, and how to sort of operationalize that so that I could have a smooth transition. But yeah, I mean, it started as almost a joke, and obviously became more real in the last few months.
Well, let's get into the numbers of the business. Then let's spend some time on a travel agency business and why it's appealing. And then we will get to how one actually buys from their parent, and the obviously delicate negotiation there, and how can you be arm's length, et cetera. So you said 100 weddings or groups a year. The average group size there is 60 people.
Just about.
So that's 6,000 trips, individual trips you're planning a year or selling a year. What's the average? Can you give us what revenue is of the business?
Revenue last year was about $8 million, and that's gross booking revenue. So that's sort of all the trips added up.
That's all and so that's gross booking. So if you book a hotel, that's what you're basically paying to the hotel.
Exactly.
The customers are paying you. What is your net revenue? So your cut before your own internal expenses.
It's about 15%. So about on that 8 million, it's about 1.3 million.
Okay.
And the beauty of to your question, like, the beauty of this business is it's low overhead. There's no inventory. It's asset light. Like, the real only expense is people. And so your margins off that, the SDE, when I was talking to my dad and we got more specifics about the deal, on the $1.3 million in commissions paid to us, about 950,000 of that was SDE. So the margins are pretty amazing. And again, this is the big difference between what you would consider a traditional travel agency and something that is more niche specific and has evolved to the internet era. In some ways, we still haven't completed that cycle, but that's what was super appealing when I started to understand these numbers. It's like, okay, it's a laptop business. Like, I can be anywhere in the world and operate this business. The only expense are other people. And you pretty much know, things are fairly predictable. It's like, okay, if you have a group, what your average ticket generally is. How much people are typically paying, on average about $1,200 per person for a hotel stay, 3 or 4 nights. And we know generally those commissions are going to be about 15%. So it's a fairly predictable business, which again was appealing to me.
So we're going to unpack these numbers a little bit, but just top line is, not only is a travel agency surviving in 2025, which may surprise some people, it's a great business. It's a highly profitable business. So 1.3. So I think to really apples to apples this with other businesses, it's really a 1.3 million revenue business, because we don't. Yeah. So the commissions that drop to your top line is really 1.3 million, and then 950,000 is the SDE that goes to your father, and your mom was involved as well.
She was.
Okay. Yeah. So they're splitting 950,000. So that's, what is that? 350,000 in expenses, which is basically just people. And are the people, how are they compensated, and are they stateside? Are they offshore?
So most people are stateside. We happen to have a woman in Cancun. She's Welsh. She's amazing. We love her. But yeah, most people are primarily hourly. They'll earn commission if, they book their own trips, or let's say you have a wedding and the bride and groom come back to you a year later and say, hey, we want to go away for our anniversary. Then, the person who helped them would make commission on that. But most people are hourly. And right now, most people are stateside.
And so you have about 10 people that manage all of these logistics?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And typically the way it works is, one person is assigned for each group. Each person will manage around 10 groups per year, because each group's going to be at a different life cycle. So, one group might be just booked and they're under deposit, versus another group might be further along and they're under final payment or submitting flights, things like that. And so ideally, you have a steady workflow for each of the groups that you're managing.
And you as one of your employees may be managing sort of 4 at any given time at various stages of their cycle?
Yeah, just about. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You don't have anybody on the ground at any of the destinations. So you're not managing any of the, we'll pick you up from the airport stuff. You're just booking, essentially.
Yeah. Again, this is like very much a laptop business. We have calls with clients, emails with clients, and we work with local partners. So for, let's take Will's wedding, for example. If you're getting married in Cancun, you're going to land in Cancun, and we're going to have arranged the transportation for you. So we'll have a local partner who will pick you up. They'll have a sign with Will's wedding on it, and you're going to get whisked away to the hotel, and that's all taken care of. But we're not actually present at most of our events. Again, it's largely just behind the scenes taking care of all those logistics and administrative things to get everything squared away for them. But a destination wedding is a lot more complicated than an at-home wedding. I always tell couples, like, if you're going to get married in your hometown, you might go to your venue 8, 10, 12 times, and you know it inside and out because you visited so many times. But if you're getting married in Mexico or wherever, like, you may actually not go to that venue at all and up until 3 days before your wedding. And so they're putting a lot of trust in us. And so I take that really seriously. And we want to make sure we're buttoned up through the process to make sure all those little small details are taken care of for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you the kind of single throat to choke sort of thing? So if they have a problem on the ground, do they call you, or do they go to the hotel or the transportation provider, or the local, whomever?
It depends on like what the issue is, but there's a few different times in which, they might need to contact the transportation. If their flight flights are a mess right now. If your flight changes, it's sometimes easier to just call the transportation company, or they're at the resort already. You can just go talk to the guy in the lobby and say, hey, my flight changed. It's often much quicker to do that than send us an email. We send them an email and the guy's right there. So it just depends.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And so given that this is a laptop business and it's logistically very complicated, but it is something that the barriers to entry are non-existent, other than your your own, the customers that you bring in. What is the moat of this business, or how do you build a moat? I assume it's brand, it's referrals. I'm not sure that qualifies as moat, but please.
It's a good question. That's something that I struggle with. And when I was thinking seriously about acquiring the business from my parents, I thought about that. Like I said, there's key man risk. My dad was the face of the business. People generally booked because they talked to him. And there wasn't really moat. There's the space is interesting. There's like 2 or 3 large companies who plan destination weddings, and there's a bunch of small mom and pop companies who do this. And there's not really a moat. It's hard to say, we can get X, Y, and Z exclusive perks. Yeah, we have some of that, but that's not enough of a kicker for most people. And so the way that we like to think about it, again, like this is more qualitative than quantitative, is we've been doing this a lot longer than most people. We have a ton of experience, and it's all about the relationships. Again, 80-something% of couples that we work with never go to the resort before they actually get married. And so if they're trusting us with that process, you probably want to make sure that I've been to that resort, or someone on my team has been to that resort and knows the wedding team, knows the venues, knows all the small important details for wedding couples. And that takes a lot of time to learn, because these things move quickly and they change often. And so we take pride in, I was just down in Cancun last week, I'm going back down in a few weeks. Like, it's important for us to be there with our partners, and not everyone can do that or does do that. And I think that when we talk to couples and we talk about these things, that goes a long way. And so look, like, is it a a sustainable moat? I don't know. But it's worked so far. And I think the more we can continue to showcase that and educate couples about the importance of that, the better off we'll be.
Well, I don't think, I think most small businesses, most categories of business that show up on Acquiring Minds, don't really have a moat. They differentiate basically on service, which is kind of what you just described. And so, we like to stress test a business and try to figure out where there might be moat, but realistically, it often just comes down to delivering better service than the next guy.
Totally. It's also the other challenge, again, like listening to your podcast a bunch, sometimes it's a geographical, again, we're not geographically constrained. Sometimes it's like, oh, we're the number one partner of this resort. And that's not the case. We work with about 35 to 50 different properties, generally speaking, in a given year. And so to your point, like it's hard to define what that moat looks like. And the service aspect is so important. Again, like a couple comes to us and then they're bringing 60 people and saying, hey, trust Jared with the decision we've made. And so it's important for us to deliver for not just our business, but for the couples, really.
Well, and I think that is one of the, despite how compelling the numbers of this business are and the flexibility and the ability to travel, all the stuff that we're talking about, that does feel like one of the weaknesses of the business where you've got to get 1,000 out of 1,000 little decisions correct for every single client, because if one of those little things goes wrong, you get angry customers. They're only getting married once, we hope. Yep. And we all understand this. Like if there's one little hiccup in your travel plans, there's a ripple effect and it can throw a lot of things off and people get really mad really quick. So being under that pressure seems rather unpleasant. Respond.
Yes. It's tough. Like I come from the tech world where I'm working with Fortune 500 advertisers. I came from government before that, where I was working with senators, members of Congress. And so like, I understood the pressure cooker. It's like you walk into a meeting with a senator and they're upset about their Twitter account being hacked or whatever it is, whatever the thing is, or you walk into a meeting with an ad agency and they're mad because, their campaign was terrible, whatever it is. And so I'm used to that, but in a lot of ways, it feels even more magnified when it's someone's wedding. It could be the most important day in their life. And when they have 60 people who they're bringing and, now their friends are upset, whatever, like it happens. Exactly. There's no way around this. And it's tough. It hurts. Like I won't sugarcoat that. Like every time I get a less than 5-star review, I feel like a little sting inside. And oftentimes it's things that are out of our control. My parents and I always joke, we'll get a 4-star review because the French fries at the resort were cold. And it's like, that had nothing to do with us. We can't control that. And that really hurts. And I think it's, partially like educating people what we do and where we sit in the process. But also understanding that people are people. And the more we can do to just make sure that we deliver upon these like champagne experiences and sort of surprise and delight people with the good, hopefully any small hiccups along the way will be forgotten or, they're okay to look past them. Because look, like I remember my wedding, like things go wrong. It happens.
Right.
And that is certainly one of the downsides of the business is it's a people business and it's all about relationships and it's all about delivering service. And it's hard because we aren't the only piece in the supply chain. And so making sure that we nail as much as we can control and work with partners who can deliver upon that is really important.
Yeah, it's got to be very frustrating to be held accountable for things that are completely outside of your control. You're kind of the face of this entire experience, even if there's like 20 vendors involved. On the other hand, and so, you get dinged because of the cold fries. On the other hand, your competitors suffer the same dynamic. Totally. So if you're getting the occasional lost star for something out of your control, so too are your competitors. And so if you're held up next to your competitors, there's a level playing field at least. To the point about reviews, that is where we would hope there would be some moat or some built-in value there. What does it look like? What did that look like? A 15-year-old business and the YouTube videos.
Yeah, I'll touch on the YouTube videos after. So something that honestly I was inspired by SMB Twitter and a lot of the home service businesses was how important reviews are. We weren't asking for reviews. We didn't really think about that. It was kind of like we thank our couples after they return home, send maybe a note to guests saying, thanks for traveling with us, whatever. But we weren't concerned about reviews. In some ways, it was like, well, we don't want people to see how many weddings we're doing, and we don't want people to give reviews because then we were afraid of the 4-star review because the French fries were cold or the view wasn't perfect or it rained. All these things that aren't in our control.
Yeah.
And again, inspired by SMB Twitter and all the home service business who are sharing how important reviews are for rankings and different things like that, and just trust online. I worked with my parents. I was like, look, we got to double down on this. And so we built systems to ask people for reviews and to encourage people to leave reviews. And in doing so would explain, hey, please review how we were in booking your room or in arranging your transportation. So it was more concrete, and it wasn't just like, how was your time at the resort? And over time, going back to your moat question, like that has become a moat. We have hundreds of 5-star reviews on Google, hundreds of 5-star reviews on The Knot and Wedding Wire, all these sites where prospective wedding couples look to, see what this online business that, they've never met before might be about. And so that has become a moat over time. And we're really proud of every review that we get, because we whether good or bad, honestly, like the feedback is helpful. And hearing from couples and seeing their pictures and guests too. Like I love seeing guest reviews because it shows they had such an amazing time celebrating their friends, and it means a lot. And so the reviews have definitely been a big focus for us over the last few years.
I was just going to ask, so have you it's been a big focus. Have you noticed the benefit of that? So as your reviews across the internet increased, you saw more leads come in?
Absolutely. I mean, I can see it on the Google business page. But I also talk to couples who say, oh, I saw you have 200 5-star reviews or whatever it is. And they mention that and how helpful that is, that they did the research. Because every couple now, they're scrolling Instagram, they're scrolling TikTok, they're looking online, they're looking on YouTube. Like they're hitting all these different channels to make their decision. And it's a really thoughtful research process for a lot of people. And I think in a lot of ways, our reviews may be the thing that pushes them over the edge when they're sort of debating between us and another competitor of, well, these people clearly know what they're doing because they've got all these reviews. And we like to think we do, but it's helpful that, so many of our clients over the years have also totally fed into that and sort of supported that we do know what we're doing. We do have the tools in place to help this all come to life, which is certainly helpful. So yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen an increase in trust, and probably has helped our lead flow as well.
I'm getting the impression that the travel agency business industry might be a little bit behind on proactively asking for reviews versus home services, where it's like it's table stakes at this point. You can't really differentiate on that. You have to have it to compete. Totally. Good reviews online.
And again, it's one of those things that for the average travel agency owner is probably in my parents' demographic. They're probably in their 50s or 60s. They've probably been doing this for 20 or 30 years. They probably get most of their leads through referrals. And they're probably not in a specific niche. They're just sort of doing a little bit of everything. And so the things that, again, like I go back to Twitter and X, like so many of the lessons I learned by just observing and being a part of the community were, the average person wouldn't say, well, like, what does an HVAC business have to do with a travel agency? All the lessons learned in getting reviews, if I apply them and no one else does, that's going to give us that edge.
Yeah.
And so that's been, again, a huge help.
Really cool. Well, thank you, HVAC business owners, for helping out Jared here.
It's so funny. It's like even to the point where I've considered doing some of the other HVAC-esque or home service-esque marketing things. So whether that's mailers or some of these more traditional marketing tactics. I tested recently sending handwritten thank you notes to a group when they returned home, and some other, again, marketing tactics that I've seen others do, not in the travel space at all, and just using it as inspiration to test. And again, I know that other people in the travel space aren't doing this.
Yeah.
And so if we can cut through and reach people, then it's a massive win.
Well, it is a win, Jared. And it's something that you should really run toward, because as I understand this from kind of being in marketing, essentially, or selling marketing, that marketing is so competitive and so dynamic, and the best tactics are eventually competed away. Mm-hmm. And we saw this in home services. You'll hear people talk about HVAC was essentially where travel is back in 2016.
Yeah.
And there was a window there from like 2016 to 2018, 19, where you could really leapfrog your competition if you were savvy online, doing the digital marketing best practices. And that window has long since closed, and it's now table stakes, and it's highly competitive, and lead cost is really high, and everybody has good reviews. So any marketing tactics that you can employ, you should employ quickly, because they're kind of by their nature transient.
Yep.
So pretty cool opportunity for you. The YouTube channel.
Yes. So it's interesting. Again, one of these things that just happened by accident during COVID. Everything shut down, as everyone remembers. Travel was probably one of the worst hit industries. And we had tons of weddings booked, and my dad was getting calls left and right from couples and guests saying, well, what do I do? What's going to happen? What should I tell my friends and family? And he's like, I know maybe as much as you, maybe a tad more, but like, I don't have the answers. And he got frustrated, and he was sort of just sitting around like, I'm just going to record a video and answer some of these questions for people. This is a 60-something-year-old guy who's been in this industry for a long time. He didn't have a YouTube channel. He wasn't a YouTuber. And he's like, I'm just going to do it. And so he's sitting and he records these videos. He starts answering people's questions, and it just takes off. It wasn't just the clients that he was sending the videos to. These videos were taking off. He was talking about, what does this mean for my wedding in the future, and what resorts are handling, post-COVID well, and all these new things. And as travel came back, his channel just took off, and his organic YouTube channel became probably our top source of leads over the course of a few years. Really just a dynamic way for him to educate people. And again, there was no selling. He actually started under not even the Vacationeeze brand, which is the name of our company. He started under this Desk-to-Ed tips brand, because he's like, I don't really want it to be affiliated. I just want to help people who don't know what to do and have a bunch of questions. And he would mention our company like once in each video, maybe once. And it wasn't even in the bio or anything. And it took off. And again, I think it's because no one in this space is doing stuff like this to just educate people and arm them with information. And he was serving that need. And so the YouTube channel, he wound up posting and like once a week. He'd record and edit his videos himself. I mean, it's super impressive. Like I'm always in awe of both my parents, and it's really, really cool what he's been able to do by creating a YouTube channel. Again, like by the standards of a YouTuber, having 3,000-4,000 subscribers isn't huge, but when you're talking quality of subscribers and how valuable one wedding is to us, getting a few leads a week from the YouTube channel is massive. And so it's been cool to see the growth of that channel as a organic marketing tool for us.
Well, the last point you made there is it's such a good lesson in content marketing, because when you say took off, we think of a YouTube channel that takes off as something that goes viral,
right,
and we think in the millions now, because TikTok and the stories we hear about TikTok are the types of numbers we hear. This channel, I'm looking at it right now, has 4,500 subscribers.
Yeah,
this is a tiny channel by
totally
mainstream standards, but it's all about. It's a cliche now in internet marketing, but it's all about that long tail. And if you are in a long tail where there isn't already a few authoritative voices, and crucially, your average ticket price is really high, it makes sense all day long. I mean, he just makes a few sales off of these, and it's can be really a game changer. But these, I'm looking at the most recent. Looks like he's still doing it. I mean, the most recent video was 7 days ago.
He loves it.
These have a few hundred views, like nothing huge, but such a good example of long tail content marketing. And by the way, too, at least like the intro video, or the one that first comes up when you visit the channel, it's not at all overly produced. He's not speaking in, I think he has a lapel mic.
Yeah.
But it's not like it's super high quality or super well produced. It's very human. And it's exactly what you said. It's like your dad just kind of turned on the mic and started talking. It's really cool. It's really, and it's nice to hear and realize that like that sort of content marketing for a small business still works in 2025, because this is like what Gary Vee's been talking about for 15 years. Still opportunities to do it.
It's so interesting. Like my career up until this point was working with Fortune 500 advertisers who, do spend millions of dollars on highly produced content and will think for a year about what their next video will look like. And here's my dad in the basement shooting footage on, a camera he bought on Amazon, and it's, resulting in tons of revenue for him. And I was, at first, we were like, this is crazy. This isn't going to work. And then, I start doing calls with prospective couples, and they'll say, hey, I just watched 7 hours of videos from Jack. I know, I laughed about it too. And then they go, I know exactly what resort I want. I know when I want to get married and all that. So he was not only taking them through the funnel through his videos, but they were so much more, they were so much better informed. And it was remarkable. I mean, the funniest story is he was sitting at a resort one time, this a few years ago, and he's sitting there and a woman's kind of looking at him, and my mom and him notice it, and they're like, this is weird. Like, why is she looking at us? Like, do we know him? And she comes up and she says, hey, are you Jack? He's like, yeah, do I know you? She said, oh, I watched your YouTube videos. I'm actually down here checking out the resorts to potentially get married here.
Oh, wow.
And like she recognized, and again, like he's not an influencer by any means, but it's remarkable to your point, like the power of these smaller channels, and the watch time. Again, like my world, I was always working with clients who are like, we need, a CPM of X and Y amount of video views. And if a video gets 100 views, it could be like the best video of that month, because those 100 people could be prospective couples. And so people always sort of poo-poo B2C versus B2B, but in this sense, the B2C, having a high quality audience and talking to the right people with the right message, it resonates. I mean, it's authentic, it's real, it's human. And that's what we want when we talk to couples. Again, we want to build that trust. And the way to do that isn't with highly produced content. It's to be real and to show them the blemishes of resorts, and to show them, that this won't be a perfect planning process. And, maybe this thing won't be exactly how you envision it, but like, we're going to help you through that. And we're there with you to make it as great and as stress-free as it can be. And we really try and hit home that ethos and philosophy.
Jared, before we turn to the theme of acquiring a business from your parent, there's a lot there. Anything more to say about travel agencies as a category? Are they enduring? I mean, we've already talked about how the internet killed kind of the mainstream, undifferentiated travel agency. For these niche travel agencies like yours, are they enduring? It's kind of like, I guess if the internet hasn't killed it yet, it's probably not going to. Are they for sale? Is this something that people should look at? Do you see them on Biz Buy Sell when you were going through your tire kicking phase? What can you share broadly about this category of business for the listener?
I think it's undoubtable that travel agencies, as we probably knew them, many years ago, have disappeared or will potentially disappear. I think the ones that do well are the ones, again, this is sort of the traditional model. The ones that still do well are geographically constrained. So they're the travel agency in town. And, as the population ages, people want to go have that hand-to-hand relationship, and they want to go into a store, they want to call the guy down the street who they know through the community. And so I think there will be a place for those. And those tend to be sort of will help you with any type of travel business for that town. So I think those will survive because people still want that human touch. I think the online travel agencies, or OTAs, the big ones being obviously like Expedia and some of the other brand names that we all know, if you're trying to compete against them, it's just a massive uphill battle. Those companies have billions of dollars of marketing budgets every year, and you can't compete against that. If you don't have the moat, you don't have the marketing budget, like it's just so hard. We're seeing some success with it. Like there are, again, mom and pop or individuals who are coming out. There's a lot of people actually in sort of a younger demographic who are saying, well, I'm going to do it on TikTok, and they're going to blow up on TikTok, and then they're going to turn that into sort of a 1 or 2 person show travel agency. I think there's some success. I don't know how durable that is, but people are having some success. And then the other end of the spectrum, I think, would be companies like ours that sort of niche down and become an expert on one specific type of travel. For us, that's niche group travel. For some of your other guests, that's been group tours to Italy, different things like that. And so I think those will be good. And again, another thing I learned through SMB Twitter is like, find the business that can't be Amazoned away, that can't be commoditized. And it's really, really hard to plan a destination wedding. It's impossible, let's be honest, through ChatGPT. Like there's just not a way right now. And maybe, in 5 years I come back and I go, oh crap, I was so wrong about this. But I really don't see a way in which you can plan this through an AI tool right now, or through Amazon, for example. And so I think the industry has evolved. And again, like there's probably those traditional players that will try and survive as long as possible. But the industry as we knew it 20 years ago is not the same, but there is this whole new evolution of the industry that's super appealing. And I don't think it's the most acquisitive space. I think partially because of some of the issues that we talked about earlier. But there are
what issues are those? Which ones?
I think that it's largely project based. I think that it's hard to compete with the big OTAs. That there's a lot of key man risk. It might be Will's travel agency, and everyone just wants to talk to Will. And those people are kind of just retiring and winding down, or they're just selling it to the guy next door in the next town over, whatever it is. So it's not if you look on Biz by Sell, and I've looked over the years, like there's maybe one or two for sale at a given time. And a lot of them skew, again, more towards the group niche, which obviously is a theme that we're coming to, of groups is kind of where it's at, because it's more scalable, it's more predictable, and you avoid some of those issues of competition. So it's not something that's just filled on Biz by Sell. We're just going to see hundreds of these for sale. It's just not how it is in this industry.
Yeah. And frankly, maybe that's a good thing. So for the listener who finds this type of business appealing, there could be if they're not all over Biz by Sell, it probably means that, you could reach out, you could do a lot of proprietary outreach, and these owners are not hearing from searchers or other people who want to buy their businesses, and there could be great opportunity. Your point about the group travel, and that's really where this niche lives and thrives, or that's where travel agencies, smaller travel agencies, live and thrive, is such a good one. It's a benefit to you. It's also where the type of travel where the customer is really going to look to have a consultant is the word you haven't used that word. I keep using that word, but that's kind of what it feels like.
100%.
It's like your kind of your personal, your concierge experience. Even if ChatGPT gets to the point, AI gets to the point where it could do an entire plan for your destination wedding, you could imagine people just not wanting that. They just want to deal with a human for an experience like that and a purchase that large. So it does seem pretty well protected against AI. And another point about the group agencies, group travel and how that's kind of the niche where travel agencies work. You mentioned Shell Zhang of Not As Italy. So a couple months ago, we aired her interview. Shell also bought a travel agency, and we had a somewhat similar conversation to the one you and I are having now, Jared. And her Not As Italy does group travel to Italy. One thing in her case that I think is also a trend that you haven't mentioned is that her target demographic trends older.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the retiree folks who want to do group travel and don't want to deal with pointing and clicking, and maybe want the group experience because they want to meet other people. That's kind of her. And now in destination weddings, that's going to be less the case. So that's maybe not but I think that is another trend to call out. That's kind of where she plays that age group. One other trend that you touched on that I just don't want to leave hanging. So there are other travel agencies that thrive that are like the local town travel agency. And so what are they? Retail? Like they have a retail presence and everybody in town like walks in and does their travel that way? Okay.
Most of them have been around for a long time. Maybe second or third generation even, or they're, a franchise. And again, this probably skews towards an older demographic. And they're going in, they're talking to a person, they're saying, hey, I want to go to France this summer. What can you help me with? And so again, I think that similar to Not As of Italy, like that's probably marketed towards an older demographic, who they know their person in the store, and they go in, they talk to them, and they help arrange the travel.
Yeah. Fascinating. I mean, I feel like I haven't seen.
They're disappearing for sure, but they're still out there. They're still out there.
Okay, and also we're talking about how the business model still works and is protected from the future. But in terms of upside, you've already touched on it a little bit, but just flesh that out for us. You see the levers to pull. You see more marketing to do. Tell us more about how you could get this business from 1.3 in top line to 5.
Yeah.
And assuming you do want to grow the big enterprise that your dad was resisting. Okay. All right. So tell us about the vision.
Again, like I'm not imagining a world in which we're the number one in the space. Like that's not, maybe that's bad for me to say, but I'm not envisioning hundreds of people on our team. I think if we can get to 5 million in top line, that would be a great place to be. So the levers, one is people. Again, if people are our biggest expense, how do we look at that to become more efficient? One of the ways is by working with more global talent. I've done this a little bit already. But again, talent isn't necessarily geographically constrained, and our business isn't either. So we should be thinking about that more holistically. So that's the first. Second would be marketing. Again, like the YouTube channel was fully organic. We've tested some paid ads over the years, but not really in a meaningful way. We just brought on a organic social agency to help with some organic social. We don't really do a ton of partnership marketing or anything like that. So all these different levers that we can pull are just sitting there and waiting. So those are probably the two big things. Again, if I look at the P&L, the number one expense is people. So I'm going right there first. And then the biggest gap is marketing. So that's sort of number two for me.
I was just going to say, exciting, Jared. I love the business and I love the opportunity. And of course, we all love to hear about a business that, I mean, we shouldn't say that your dad hasn't been marketing because he has this amazing YouTube channel and you guys got savvy about reviews a few years ago. So it's not like none of the levers have been pulled, but it sounds like there's still so many more to pull. And that's always just such an enticing prospect.
Something crazy I'll share is, again, we talked about the math earlier in the show, but in a given year, about 100 groups, each group's about 60 people. You're talking 6,000 people who we help plan their travel every year. We have their email address. They've paid. We've communicated with them a few times. They return home. We generally don't speak to them ever again after we welcome them home. We, for the longest time, haven't leveraged our email list. And again, like if I think back to what works in other industries, we should be talking to these people every month, at least, recommending other places that they can travel. You know, if a new resort just opened up down the street of where they went last time, if, hey, we know that, you know, you're in a certain demographic, maybe you want to go on a golf trip, or maybe you want to go to Italy, or maybe you want to do a river cruise, you know, all these other things that we are also fairly good at, and have team members who know this stuff, but we don't make that request and we don't showcase that. And this is low-hanging fruit, right? Like these are the things that, coming from a digital marketing and a sales background, I look at this and I go, okay, so we have 6,000 people each year just organically being added to our network that we're talking to regularly, and then we just cut it off. And that's it. I'm not even talking a paid acquisition channel. I'm talking people who are already in our network. And so there's little things like this that I look at this and I'm sort of like, all right, let's get going. And then sort of getting the systems in place and making sure we have everything ready to go and slowly testing that out.
And you would want to be slow there, because of all the 60 people who go on a trip, only a few of them, or maybe even two, the principals, the husband and wife, let's say in the case of a wedding, are the ones that interacted with you guys, right?
No, so actually
the other 58 aren't going to know, or they are?
They all, so we interact with every single guest. We help them with their travel. We help them with their transportation. So we probably email them over the course of the life cycle, probably 6-7 times.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great.
So no, it's not just the couple, it's all the guests. So it's everyone. So yeah, we have that relationship already. And so they should be a little familiar with us. They may not think of us in the vein of, you know, what their next trip looks like, but it's our job to educate them of, you know, this is also what we can do for you down the road.
Cool. Love that. What a list. Okay, Jared. How does one buy a business from one's parents? Do we need more context here? Did we already get enough of the plot as to like how it zeroed in? You guys kind of were zeroing in on this possibility, joke becomes reality sort of thing. Pick us up. Where do we start here? Yeah.
So again, as we were saying earlier, it started as a joke, became close to reality. I had done some research on what reasonable multiples could look like. I explained to my dad what some of the risks are, and him being key man, things like that. We talked about what deal terms and a purchase price could look like. I won't sugarcoat it. Like I was very lucky in the purchase price he gave me, or he wanted. And again, this is pro and con of buying a business from your parents. It was due diligence, because I knew the insides of the business. I'm the one who built the tracker. I'm the one who sort of monitors the revenues. Like I knew a lot of the nuances. And so there wasn't a QOV. There wasn't some of the other more traditional due diligence things, because I already knew a lot of that. And so, pro and con for sure. But
what's the con? That sounds nothing but good.
The con is maybe I had some tunnel vision, right? Like maybe because I've already knew the business, that I could be coming in blind to some things that I overlook, or that someone coming from the outside more objectively might look and they go, oh my gosh, that's a huge red flag. Granted, that's where ideally, like the bank that I worked with Heather from Viso Capital, like she would have called these things out. So, there's other things along the road that hopefully would have come to light, but I wanted to go in as open-minded as possible to understand the pros and cons of this business and what potential risks, if we go from 100 groups a year to 30, what does that look like? If we go from 100 to 200, what does that look like? And I really wanted to be clear-minded and open-minded about what that could look like. And honestly, talk to my dad about it, because again, he knows this business way better than me. And I wanted to make sure he was aware that, hey, I'm not just asking for a discount, I'm asking for, a reasonable valuation on what this business looks like if he steps away or when he steps away, and I take over things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, aside from the fact that you didn't have to spend money on a QOV, you could save some serious outlay that most people shouldn't when they're going through an acquisition. You could trust the seller.
Totally.
And I just had an interview, which will air a couple of weeks before yours, with Jed Morris, whose acquisitions went sideways and lost it all. Terrible story. And he's since connected with a lot of other acquisition entrepreneurs who had bad outcomes. And he's probably a couple dozen of them. And he's tallied some data. It's not statistically significant, but it's enough to draw some conclusions. The majority of these stories gone wrong, more than 50% of them, are due to a fraudulent or unethical seller. I was at MIT's ETA conference last week and on a panel about this very topic. And I think in 3 of the 4 cases of the panelists who had terrible experiences with their acquisitions, it was about a bad seller. So this really is reason number 1 why acquisitions fail. Of course, there are other reasons, but so you could, and it's just very, very hard to know in advance. Of course, if you just have a totally shady seller, usually you'd walk away anyway. But sometimes. Sometimes you can't tell until you get inside the business, and then it's too late. So you didn't have that. That was just the biggest risk of all, was a non-risk for you.
Yeah, and again, that's why I feel so lucky and grateful, because I've known the seller for 30 something years, and we have a great relationship, and he loves me and I love him. Like it's again, like I'm joking or half joking, but like it's such an important thing. And again, that mattered when I was thinking through a few years ago, like, should I acquire my parents' business? That was one of those themes that came to light as I was doing more research, that I need to trust the seller. And I felt most comfortable going down that road. Again, like, no acquisition is perfect. And there's things where now that I'm in the driver's seat, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to fix this, or I got to pick this thing up, or my dad did it one way and I'm like, I totally want to do it a different way. And that's normal. But knowing that I can trust him, and frankly, he has my best interest in mind. He's carrying a seller note, and he is still happy to jump on calls. He's like, hey, if you want me to talk to that couple, I will. And if you want me to still make YouTube videos, like, I will. So those things it's hard to quantify them, but they're invaluable. And so I felt really confident going in, knowing that was the case. Yeah.
Well, I want to continue unpacking this because those are all the pros. Now that there are going to be some cons about, for example, stepping on the toes or changing the way the seller did it. If it's dear old dad, it might be even more awkward than it can sometimes be when the seller's involved. We'll get there. But first, the numbers. You mentioned that it was a beneficial to you purchase price. Can you shed more light?
Yeah. So 2024 SDE was right around $1 million. And so the agreement was 2x SDE. So purchased it for $2 million. Part of that agreement was that he would carry a 10% seller note. I do 10% equity. And the remaining like 1.7-ish would be an SBA loan. So did structure it in a more traditional way. But again, that multiple was certainly very reasonable in my favor.
And why do you think your dad, is it because it was his son that he gave you a good price? Because you probably would have bought it for, I guess. Yes, that's obvious.
The obvious answer is yes. I think,
but Jared, even 3x would have been, a good price sort of thing.
Totally. And again, when we were going through the diligence phase and working with the bank, and we stress tested it, 3.5 still would have worked given where the margins are in this business.
Right.
So yeah, and people always say, oh, you want the terms, not the price. And in this case, I think because of how the business is, he named the price, and I sort of said, okay, that's fine. I wasn't about to roll up my sleeves and start arguing with him, because how the business is structured and where the revenue is now, it's something that I'm very comfortable with, and feel like there's a path to growth. So the obvious answer is like, it's largely because the familial relationship. And I recognize like that is not the norm. Not everyone acquiring a business has that opportunity.
Right. No, of course. But and you understand, and it's great. And this is where we're all trying to build generational wealth. And this is, the discount that you got on this business is kind of part of that. And that's a wonderful thing. And I suspect and hope that your father feels a lot of gratification to be able to do that. So the way it came to that price, there was no negotiation. He came to you with a price and you said yes.
Effectively.
Just curious, because in other words, what I'm trying to get at is like, how does one negotiate against dad? And there wasn't much negotiation.
I would rib him. It's so funny. Again, not a normal situation. But we'd be like standing in the kitchen of my childhood home, and he's like, "Oh, I could just go sell this for 4x to private equity." And I'm like, "No, Dad, like, you don't understand. Like, if you walk away from the business, it all disappears, and there's no marketing, there's no managers, like all these things that again would be more traditionally looked upon as a massive negative." And he's like, "Well, I don't care. I'll just go sell it to someone else." And again, like it was in jest and on both of our sides, but the negotiating was largely like he named his price. And this is before he said this 3 years ago. He said, whatever the 2024 SDE, he didn't call it that. He said, whatever I take home in 2024, just 2x that. And so, when we sort of went down that road, I didn't know what that would look like, but that's where we netted out on things. But yeah, the negotiation was fairly non-existent. Again, and I think largely because I had done the research and because of your podcast and some of the other podcasts that I've listened to and the SMB community, like I knew that it was a multiple in which there was room to be stress tested and room for me to feel more comfortable.
Yeah. You mean the low multiple meant that you were already having a lot of room there.
Yeah.
Like no reason to squeeze.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to talk out of the other side of my mouth here, not sure. So on the one hand, you got a great deal because it's dad. On the other hand, there are probably some people who are like, well, he should have just given you the business, or he should have 100% seller financed. It was seller finance, not my perspective, and not the culture of my family, not the way. But you can imagine that there are voices out there who are like, well, why didn't he just give it to you? Inherit the business as an inheritance.
Yeah.
Now, you've also mentioned you have siblings, so there's maybe that's a function. / he just shouldn't do it anyway. It's not my, but to those people, you would say,
look, I don't know exactly what's in my parents' minds at any given point, but if I'm thinking about it, and again, knowing the seller for a long time, he worked hard. Like he built this business over many years. He took many angry a phone call from a client. He had to figure these things out himself. And so why would he just hand over the keys to me? And like, why am I deserving of just being handed, this business that on the market would be probably a $3.5 million business? Like that's his money. He earned that.
Exactly.
And I would feel uncomfortable, frankly, if he just handed me the keys. I knowing I have, and you mentioned the larger seller, and like I tried, that was the one point where I tried to negotiate with him a little bit, saying, hey, can you carry a larger note? And in a way, I'm grateful. Like, obviously, I'd be appreciative if it was a larger note, but I have this SBA loan, which is terrifying. Don't get me wrong, but it makes me feel an additional layer of responsibility to help carry on their legacy and what they've built, and to make sure it is sustainable, because the government will come after me. So I'm grateful. Again, this is maybe a little strange, but like I'm grateful that it's structured in like the traditional way, even though the multiple is lower and whatnot, because I feel that the responsibility does weigh heavy on me. That I do want to make sure that I make my parents proud and continue what they've built. And I wouldn't have expected him just to hand me the keys, and that's not the way I was raised, and that's not the way that I would want in the future. Maybe if my kids want this, whatever, like it's just not in my ethos, really.
Yeah, mine either. Maybe I overestimate how many people out there would think that, because I'm with you. I wouldn't think that for a second. But we just hear about inherited businesses, and maybe when we hear that, we shouldn't assume that there was no transaction. Maybe there was some kind of transaction at a discount, like yours was structured.
Totally.
Who knows? But very interesting. And to the point of the siblings, there was no inkling by them that they would. No. Okay.
No, my brother runs his own business. My sister's a rabbi. So they're everyone's doing their own thing.
They're spoken for.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start wrapping up here, Jared. Fascinating. But a couple more mechanics of the deal itself. You mentioned using Heather Anderson Adviso, who is a loan broker. How did you choose to use an SBA loan broker as opposed to going directly to a bank? Give us a little bit of that experience.
It all comes back. I feel like I'm just doing an advertisement for my previous employer. I had met her on Twitter. I think she had tweeted, many years ago, like, I'm locked out of my account. Can anyone help? And I was following her. I was like, hey, I can help you out. And then we just wound up talking a few times over the last few years. And then when it came time to purchase this business, I'd seen her content, I heard her on podcasts, we had talked. And so I reached out, and she was amazing. She helped me through the process. She helped evaluate different banks, and really helped me understand. Again, I don't come from a financial background. I've worked in like marketing and sales and social media. And so she helped me understand some of these mechanics of the process and what a deal looks like. So it wasn't so much like using a loan broker or not. It was like, I want to work with Heather. And that was kind of what it came down to.
But when you reflect back, if you can decouple Heather from working with a loan broker, that question, working with a loan broker and having somebody on your behalf kind of reach out to the banks and try to find the right deal bank fit for you. I'm not trying to spoon feed this to you, but did you feel there was value to that
100%
proposition?
I wouldn't have known where to start. I mean, again, like you hear the popular banks who are marketing, whatever, but being handed term sheets and being explained, this is the pro of this is the con of this. We should wait for this other bank for this reason. She's been through it before. Again, it's the same reason why people trust us to plan their travel. I trusted a loan broker because this is what they do. And so I'm always okay paying for it. And in this case, you don't even pay the loan broker. I always prefer to have the expert on my side and her being able to navigate that process. I've never been through this before. And so why should I feel confident that I can do this myself when she's seen this, hundreds, thousands of times?
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, great. Putting a fine bone in it, I would certainly recommend it to anyone. You don't pay any extra for it. So it's definitely recommended. Actually,
this was something else I wanted to touch on earlier. Because you bought a business from dad and mom, is there more awkwardness in terms of doing things differently?
I don't think so. No, they're very understanding that, they did their things their way and I'm going to do things my way. And again, like I'm with any seller, you trust what they have to say and it's their experience, right? So the things that they built worked for them and the things that I'm going to build are going to work for me. And I think they're very understanding that some things are going to change. And even if they have some limited involvement, like they are okay with that because again, they've sold to me and they're okay with that. But yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of awkwardness of, thinking about some things that they did. I'm like, I don't really want to do that same way, or I want to tweak that. But again, I try to be reasonable and thoughtful about it and try to understand, I think back to some of the conversations on your podcast or other podcasts and online. And I think about how some people say, oh, you just sprinkle in marketing or just add AI or whatever it is, or just, add offshore talent, whatever it is. And oftentimes it's not that simple. And the reason a seller had a thing was because it worked and because they've done it for 10, 15, 20 years and they know that thing works for that reason. So it's helpful to understand why it is that way. And then figure out, okay, does that actually make sense? Or should we, find a different path? For example, the CRM tool we use looks like it's from 1999. And for a long time, my dad and I have talked about like, we should switch and, all these other things. And it's like, well, the cost of it's super low. It does the job. It's just an ugly UI. Again, I come from a tech world. So I'm like, yeah, but it could be so much more beautiful and work so much faster. And it's like, but it works and it's not a huge line item on the P&L and it does the trick. And so if it's ugly, it's kind of okay for right now. That's not my number one priority. And so things like that, there's no awkwardness and it's helpful for me to know the background and the context of these things so that I can have better informed decisions on like the systems and things I do want to change.
Fantastic, Jared. Anything that you wanted to say about your story that we didn't get to?
No, thank you for having me on. Thanks for letting me share my story. I'm super excited about the travel space. I think one of the reasons I originally reached out to you is I think there's a lot of misnomers about the travel industry and travel agencies. And I love talking to people who are in this space and shedding light on, actually travel is a really cool space. And there's a lot of innovation that could be going on and maybe isn't yet. And I'm just excited to share that journey.
Well, just to repeat, we had Shell Zhang a couple of months ago. So we've now got you and Shell, two recent stories of travel agency acquisitions. And then you introduced me to somebody else who may come on later, who also bought a travel agency, different, actually with retail. So a different model, but similarities, group travel. So it's definitely, there's definitely a changing of the guard in this industry. And of course, it's a fun industry if you can deal with the pressure of delivering perfect experiences or near perfect experiences to your customers. Who doesn't like the idea of being able to, go to Italy and Cancun on the company's dime, or have that actually be your job? Good stuff, Jared. And so in terms of people reaching out, we'll include your LinkedIn, but you have also agreed to come do a live Q&A with listeners to this episode. So we will have promoted the exact date and time of that in the introduction to this episode and in the outro and in the show notes. So that'll be a lot of fun. Listeners, if you want to come ask Jared a question and over Zoom, we'll be hosting him to do that. Thank you for saying yes to that, Jared. Any other way that they should contact you? LinkedIn, live Q&A, Twitter, I guess?
Yeah,
Are you still active?
Yeah, I'm still, I'm a lurker for sure. I don't post a lot, but my handle is Benoff. Just my first initial, last name. And yeah, I'm on there. Feel free to DM me. It's how I made connections with a lot of people in the community. So happy to chat with people from there.
The name of the business is Vacationeeze, EEZE?
That's correct.
All one word, Vacationeeze.
Yep.
Got it.
Yeah.
Jared Benoff, congratulations on a really neat business. Great acquisition, great multiple. What a story. Thank you for sharing all the detail with us.
Thanks for having me, Will. Appreciate it.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. Don't forget to subscribe to the Acquiring Minds newsletter. We send an email for every episode with an introduction to the interview, a link to the video version on YouTube, and soon, key takeaways, numbers, and more essentials from the interview for those of you who don't have time to listen or watch it. Subscribe at acquiringminds.co. You'll also find all our webinars there on the website, both those we have coming up and recordings of past webinars. At this point, there are over 30 webinar recordings, a wealth of information on all the technical nitty-gritty of buying a business. acquiringminds.co.